Men sit in the snow of the Himalayas and do not care to wear any garment. What is heat? What is cold? Let things come and let things go. What is that to me? I am not the body. Swami Vivekananda. Welcome to this week's episode of Warfare, Advancement, and Revisionism. My name is Preston Floyd, and as always, I am your host. I'd like to thank you all for joining me this week. If you're a first-time listener, welcome. I hope you enjoy. If you're a long-time listener or recent listener, thank you for joining us again. So this week we will be talking about people living on the Tibetan Plateau. We'll be leaving South Asia behind for now. And this episode might be a little bit shorter this week. It was Mother's Day, and I went home to see my mom, and I'm back, and I'm recording, and it's fairly late, and I'm still trying to render out a couple of my prior episodes to get up on YouTube. Next week, hopefully, will be the first week that YouTube has the current episode up. So if you're listening to me there, or if you've subscribed there, go ahead and just be aware that you can listen there for all new episodes as well. And if you're not listening to me there, if you're joining me on any of the other platforms, please drop a like or download or follow, or however the system does that. I do want to thank everyone for continuing to listen in. The show's, it's seeing some growth still, and I'm looking forward to seeing how much it can grow for the remainder of this year. But let's get to the meat of this episode now. So to start with, we're going to talk about the plateau itself. Now, it was formed when the Indian subcontinent, or the Indian plate, slammed into the Eurasian plate, and by plate I mean tectonic plates. Now, due to a number of environmental factors, including elevation, where the sun hits and when, and a whole bunch of other factors, glaciers from the various glacial periods have remained in the area longer than other areas at higher latitudes. These glaciers help feed all the water systems flowing south and east. So the region was probably populated around the same time as South Asia, throughout the various hominid migrations out of Africa, provided it wasn't completely covered in ice at the time they were traveling through the region. And if it was, they moved in after the ice retreated. Though obviously, due to temperatures, environment, elevation, etc., it was never as vastly populated as the regions to the south or east. In fact, due to the rapid temperature drop and advancement of glaciers during the Younger Dryas, there is evidence that the population of these Paleolithic Tibetans suffered greatly. I mentioned in our Central Asian episode that some of the remains dated to the Younger Dryas period, or right before it, possibly right at the beginning. That these remains are closely related to remains found in Tibet in the same period, or from our period and to later. Though they were cousins of the Tibetan population, and not ancestors or descendants. So I can imagine a case where these two kind of related groups traveling back and forth between the two regions by going through mountain passes in the border of modern-day Tibet, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. And Tajikistan, too, I believe, is also accessible both ways. You can get to or from the Tibetan Plateau from Tajikistan as well. Now, the Younger Dryas hits and glaciers expand, and they get cut off from each other, and they made the environment even harsher to live in. And excuse me, from what I can tell from DNA analysis and things like that, they never traveled back into Southeast Asia. The remaining Tibetans, once the ice did melt, they never, moved back in or attempted to, at least from what we can see in the archaeological record. So they just kind of remained in that border region. Now, of course, the Younger Dryas ended about 1,700 years prior to the start of our current timeline, and these ancient Tibetans were probably seeing their numbers rebound slightly as the land became more viable and fertile. Now, this is still a very limited area that these Tibetans are living in. Most prehistoric sites related to Homo sapiens are located in the south and east of the plateau, where rivers and lakes and ponds exist. The rivers and the valleys and the courses that they follow would lead them to more numerous people to the south and to the east. Now, the sites existed near modern settlements, and it wouldn't surprise me if more of a few of them were actually buried beneath those modern settlements. Now, in terms of tools, again, you see the standard progression from Paleolithic to the Neolithic and all the in-between parts. They begin to use smaller, more specialized stones and polished stone to make more sophisticated tools. You kind of see that progression. They are nomadic, and they remain nomadic even into historical times. I think there's still a sizable portion of their population that are nomads. Now, that is something I believe China has been trying to crack down on. But the yak is very important to their lifestyle, historically speaking. That's related to, of course, the cows of Asia and Europe. The yak, they're all in the same genus, Bos. But the yak was like the primary, I guess, source of protein and milk for, the Tibetan people historically. And I will get into that eventually. I could not get a firm date on when the yak was domesticated. It's later than the cow. But I'm not sure if it will be in this domestication episode or the one after our next one coming up. But yeah, so yaks are of vital importance, and I believe they were domesticated even before the horse arrived in the area. Now, the people living there, again, their population was low, probably due to the Younger Dryas and being cut off from, relatives to the west. But they are not completely isolated. They do interact with people to the south and people to the east. And, of course, what is now to the south, you have, of course, modern-day Pakistan, India, Bhutan, Nepal. And in the east, you have modern-day China. But they also have probably interactions at later periods with people in the Central Asia. But again, that happens much later. And today, the modern country of Tibet has a number of different ethnic groups. You have the Tibetan people proper, which in Tibet itself, there's around, I think it's around 6 million people. And they do have some in India and Nepal as well. And that's not even going into, communities that immigrated after the Chinese invasion in, I believe it was the 60s. But there are other ethnic groups, people like the Chang, the Tamang, and the Monpa people. all of these people, to some extent or another, though, are related to these Paleolithic and Neolithic Tibetans. It's just a question of how much they're related or how much interaction they've had with different ethnic groups in either India or Bhutan or China or Nepal. There will be an influx of migrants from what is modern day China in the future, like in the, I think our current episode ends at 6000 BC. I think there's probably an influx, I believe, starting around, I want to say it's around 3000 BC. It might be a little earlier, might be a little bit later. It's a bit of a debate, but you can see that there are, interactions, at least in terms of material culture, between a few of the different Chinese civilizations or tool cultures and the Tibetan people. They probably get rice from these Chinese people, and it's possible that the Tibetans could have been the ones to introduce rice to their south. That is one vector of how India could have gotten rice. And it's also possible that they received barley from the Indians or the people living in now India and Pakistan. And then they possibly transferred it to the Chinese that way. And of course, being in the mountains in the Himalayas, Tibet has access to a lot of different type of stone that would be very useful for making tools and the like. So, it's very rough. It's very dangerous country. There are just a few set paths, and they're not always 100%, safe to travel, even today. But it's not heavily populated. If you get in good with the Tibetans, they can, definitely provide you with protection through the region, or at least take your goods from you and then take it to the other side of their territory and kind of play as middlemen. But that is all stuff that's going to be happening much, much later, or at least a couple of thousand years after our current time frame. Now, I know that's not a lot to go on, much like the people in the east of South Asia. Unfortunately, that's kind of what we have. China isn't too keen on letting foreigners into Tibet specifically, and there's not a whole lot that they probably don't want too much Tibetan interest in their history or that kind of thing. They want to bring them, make sure they're firmly enmeshed in the Chinese sphere. And historically, there is some evidence of interaction and trade, and them interacting with groups in China, both historically and prehistorically. But they've had just as much interaction, if not more, with the peoples of South Asia. So that's just one of those things that the modern world is affecting, kind of our understanding of the past rather than vice versa. And that's the stuff obviously we will talk about later. Let's get into some etymological stuff for the region. Tibet itself, how did that, what does that mean? Where does that come from? Well, there's actually a little bit of a debate about that. At least in English, there is a thought that Tibet came into English through actually Turkish, or possibly an Iranian or Persian language. Sogdian has been proposed as well. Essentially, it would come from something along the Turkic word Tobad, which is like, or Tobat, which is the heights. And yeah, so that get transliterated into English. it's thought that possibly the Turkish also could have come from a Chinese variant or Chinese characters written for Tufan or Tubo, which is like an old Chinese pronunciation. It could also be Topun, which is also the heights, so it could be like a direct Turkish translation of the Chinese word. As for the Tibetans themselves, they do not call Tibet. I believe, and I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation. It's closer to Bo or Fo. At least that's how it's written. It may also be pronounced closer to Bod. It's a little difficult to kind of get into because there are, I think, 3 primary Tibetan dialects. Being in a very mountainous region, they're kind of isolated from each other. They obviously have deep bonds between each other, and they share a written language, but the pronunciation, I think, can be very different. But there's Lhasa Tibet, there is Amdo, and Khams Tibetan. Those are the 3. I think they're the 3 most spoken dialects. And modern Tibet is part of the Tibeto-Burman branch of the Sinic language family. So there's it's kind of hard to get a solid like English pronunciation for the Tibetan language because there are 3 different dialects, and I know there's like a standard version of Tibetan too, but I don't think it's like widely spoken. And the way the Tibetan language is written, there's actually 2 different versions of how you can pronounce that. I think one's called Wei Li, and I forget what the other one's called, but it makes it difficult for someone who is not a linguist or much less specializing in East Asian languages to kind of get a solid pronunciation guide. It's the simplified phonetic. It's like THL, I think, is the other kind of written guide for Tibetan. And yeah, that's another thing. The historical Tibetan Plateau region, it's not always been a one unified country. Tibet itself is, I think, like a unified kingdom. I think it only goes back to I think it's like the 1600s AD. Prior to that, there were 3 or 4 polities. Sometimes they're smaller ones. Also made up of, I think Kham was one of those. Amdo was another. U is another. Sang is another. Sometimes they were united. Sometimes they were divided. That's just kind of something that, again, we'll have to kind of go into. But yeah, so that's kind of what we know of the Tibetan. Again, the Paleolithic Tibetans or the early Neolithic Tibetan people. They're fairly, they're a fairly small group due to probable environmental impacts from the Younger Dryas. That, again, they're going away at this point in time in our timeline. But it is still something that they haven't fully recovered from. And they'll soon be interacting more and more with their neighbors. And that will, and that's not just trade-wise. We have genetic evidence that they are going to get an influx of people from their neighboring regions. And that's going to help make up another, a division of these Paleolithic Tibetans. They'll all contribute to the various modern-day ethnic groups in the region, though some will be more related to them than others. But that's all stuff for future episodes to kind of dive into. Trying to think if there's anything else I want to go over for this region. It is very interesting. It's something that I'm looking forward to talking about more because it's something I've been reading a lot about recently. I've been listening to a book on tape about the Silk Road, and yeah, it's just it's really kind of gotten into my head the last couple of days. So, I don't know that I've ever gone over the etymology of Himalayas. It is also from Sanskrit, Hima, which is like frost, and Alaya, which is like a house. So it's like the house of snow, or the home of snow. They're also, I believe, personified in a couple of different Hindu myths. And it's they're I think the Himalayas, like the personification of the Himalayas, is like the father of Sarasvati and Padma, who is like the personification of I forget the river. Sorry, I'm drawing a blank. I just talked about it last week. In East, the Ganges. The Ganges is another. Padma is another name for the Ganges in Hindu mythology. So, the Himalayas is kind of like, or the personification of the Himalayas is the father of those rivers as well as others. That's kind of how that is. Plays into each other, and that's a good way to tie them into South Asia, like culturally. Obviously, being the home of three of your most important goddesses, it draws a lot of attention to the Himalayas and people living in the region. Birds are also very important in Himalaya, like mythology and like culture. Eagles, vultures, those type of deals. And I'm sure that they were very important in the Neolithic times as well, like religiously or spiritually speaking. Some of the only animals that are native to the region. Again, it's not very diverse, like in terms of biological or plant life. So I imagine that birds are very sacred for a reason. They were probably very impressive. And that's all stuff we'll get into when we start talking about Tibetan religion. But yeah, there's not a whole lot to go on. Again, it's a lot of guesswork for this type of stuff, so that's a little unfortunate. But I do look forward to coming back here in the future. Next week, though, we will be diving into Southeast Asia, Bhutan, Burma/Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, those type of countries, Vietnam, of course. That'll probably take 2 or 3 episodes, given my ability to ramble about stuff. So, I hope you look forward to that. Should be a little bit longer next week. And then we will cover East Asia after that, I believe. And then once we cover the rest of Asia, we'll jump down south to Australia and those places, and then we'll do Europe, and then from there we'll move over to the Americas. So there are some things that we can discuss pretty substantially about all of these places. So at least a couple of more months for season 3, and then we'll do our next time jump. Of course, I do want to do those specials on domestication for plants and animals, as well as talking about the process of urbanization that's going to slowly start kicking up as well. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed. I'm sorry, again, this was a shorter episode, and I didn't really have too much, factual things to talk about. But I hope you join us next week, and if you have any questions or feedback, please feel free to reach out to me at waradrevpod@gmail.com, or you can send me a direct message on Twitter, or you can comment on any of the videos I have up on YouTube. Just whichever is convenient for you, and I do hope to hear from you. I'm always welcoming feedback. But yeah, I hope you all have a great rest of your day, week, weekend, whatever it may be for you. But yeah, take it easy and have a good day. Goodbye.